Hi, everyone. I can see a couple of people still trickling in, which is excellent, but probably no time like the present, so I'll get started. Welcome to today's session with Highway to 100 Unicorns. We are really delighted to have Matt Sinclair with us today to deliver a session on building intelligent apps with AI and chatbots. We're going to cover tips, tricks, and learnings for enhancing applications with AI. So integrating AI into the application or business process can seem daunting. So many technologies, so much hype, and it just becomes too hard. This webinar will show the best practices and how to get started with AI without all the hassle. So the operative words there are how to get started with AI. By the end of this session, you will have something you can walk away with and actually be ready to do. Matt tells me that he's taken a super practical approach to today to sort of bust a few myths maybe, or actually deliver some really simple truths about AI. Matt is our Global Sales and Strategy Director for AI with Microsoft. We might let him get through any nitty-gritty that I've got, if that's not his current title. But Matt is an amazing AI wizard. He's customer-focused technologist and strategist with a passion for creating value from emerging technology. He is super specialized in cross-company strategies that capitalize on market opportunities through deep tech and industry knowledge. So his areas of expertise are IoT, AI, and ML, which is, the holy trinity at the moment. And it doesn't stop there. I'm going to hand over to Matt now to introduce himself, introduce his session. Before I do a couple of housekeeping points, the session is going to be recorded, so you can revisit it, share it with your team perhaps, watch it again later. That will be available after the session. You can either get in touch with me directly or Simran will be sharing it with you. I'll also put it up on the Startup Champs website platform, so you can, there's going to be a couple of places you can get this after the fact. And with that, I'll hand over to Matt and just hope you enjoy the session.
Good stuff. Thank you for the introduction, Kathy. And hello, everyone. It is awesome to be with you today. My name is Matt Sinclair. I am the Global Director for Sales and Strategy for AI at Microsoft. So as you heard a little in the bio, my job is to work with customers on implementing AI technologies, customers being startups, digital native companies, big oil and gas companies, banks, kind of any type of company you can think of, help them build their AI strategy and products, but then also support Microsoft in building out our strategy around AI and what products we build for customers and for the community. So I'm super excited to be here today. I have put together a bit of a different presentation that I hope you all will enjoy. A lot of the feedback I get from startups and different organizations is they kind of hear about this AI thing, but they don't really know what to do with it or how to get started, or if you've built your own technologies, your own applications and whatnot, how can you actually get started with AI? So today's session is going to be focused on basically AI for non-AI experts or non-data scientists. How do you go and grab these technologies? How do you implement them into your applications so you can start enhancing your features, so you can start enhancing your customer experience, etc. So I'm going to start sharing my screen in a moment. But what I do encourage is questions along the way. I'm a big fan of interaction throughout the discussion. It's very modular, this presentation, so if there's a particular topic you want to go deeper on, we can dive into it. Feel free to jump in with the question there and then. I'm fortunate enough to have like a 3-screen setup, so I can see the questions come through and still present at the same time. A little warning as well, I do have quite a few live demos that I'm going to try and run during this session. So everyone cross your fingers and toes for me. We'll see how it all goes. It's always a bit of fun having those, but hopefully you find it interactive and a bit more engaging beyond just slides and content. Actually, I'm just going to make sure I shared audio, because the first thing I'm going to do is share a video with you that kind of sets the tone of the session. So here we go. Cool. All right. Let me know in the chat if you don't hear this audio coming through.
Today, right now, you have more power at your fingertips than entire generations that came before you. Think about that. That's what technology really is. It's possibility, it's adaptability, it's capability.
Well,
but in the end, it's only a tool. What's a hammer without a person who swings it? It's not about what technology can do, it's about what you can do with it. You're the voice, and it's the microphone. When you're the artist, it's the paintbrush. We are living in the future we always dreamed of. We have mixed reality that changes how we see the world, and AI empowering us to change the world we see. You have more power at your fingertips than entire generations that came before you. So here's the question: what will you do with it?
So the reason why I love this video is because it emphasizes the fact that AI and cloud technologies in general are just a tool. They're a means to achieve an end. A lot of companies I speak to are thinking about AI as the end goal, but that's the wrong way to think of it. The best way to think of it is, what outcome are you hoping to achieve, and how can AI help you get there? And what I'm going to present to you today are several categories of tools that you can utilize in your business, in your applications, with your customers to achieve the outcomes that you want. I'm going to do a couple of scene setting slides to start off with, though. We had this mantra maybe like 2 or 3 decades ago, basically born from Microsoft and Bill Gates and a couple others in the community at that time, that said every company is going to become a software company. Every organization is going to develop and use software. Well, that feels a little outdated these days, right? Every company, they're using the internet, they've got mobile apps, they've got web apps, they've got all sorts of business applications they're using. You're building software for your startup. So this is kind of old. So what does the new look like? Well, the new is that every company is going to be an AI company. Every organization is going to utilize AI fundamentally. Whether it's today, whether it's tomorrow, whether it's their own AI, whether it's someone else's, every company is going to be an AI company, including yours. If you're building an organization or a startup today, you might not have AI at the front of your mind, but hopefully in the short term, if not in the midterm, you'll start using AI in your application simply to remain competitive or to provide the level of experience that your customers expect. And there's this beautiful quote from Kai-Fu Lee, who's an absolute genius in the world of AI. And he basically likens the state of AI to where we were for electricity back in the Industrial Revolution, where you had a few really smart people who created the ability to harness and mechanize electricity. And then everyone just went out and went crazy, and they started putting together fire and electricity into light bulbs. And then they took their stovetops and they put electricity in that. They took their fridges, they put electricity in that. And that's how we got a lot of this Industrial Revolution really kicking into gear. And that's what we're seeing with AI. People are taking AI and applying it to everyday processes, everyday applications to create something brand new. And so we no longer need to be Nikola Teslas of the world, where we need to have an intricate knowledge of how the deep learning model operates. Instead, we can consume what these really smart people have put together for us and simply apply it to our use case. And I'll show you how that works in a moment. But the big thing to consider for every company becoming an AI company is, well, do you build your own AI, or do you leverage AI tools? And resoundingly, I'm seeing many organizations leveraging AI tools. So this means if you're a startup of 3 people and one of you is not a data scientist, that does not mean that AI is out of reach. If you're a JavaScript developer, if you're a web developer, you're a business user, or be able to operate a computer, you can leverage AI tools that others have built to enhance your applications or create your features. And what I've got here is a bit of a map, and we're not going to go through all of this today, but just to help you categorize sort of AI technologies. And this is Microsoft's AI stack, and that's of course what we're going to focus on today. But if you look at this category here, these are all pre-built categories of AI that you can go and grab. And we're actually going to focus specifically on a couple of these. But these are all features, these are all APIs, these are all tools that you can use today. Whereas data scientists, look, there's only really one service. that sort of focuses on the data science experience, building models, etc. So the vast investment from companies like Microsoft and other cloud providers is in this space of packaging up AI so you don't have to be an expert, you can go and grab it. And what we're going to do tonight, wherever in the world you are, is I'm going to walk you through some of these technologies. So specifically the categories of technologies is what I want you to focus on here. We're going to look at vision use cases, speech use cases, language use cases, a little bit on chatbots. And if we've got time, which we never do because I always talk way too much, is we're going to talk about some of the future stuff that's coming in as well. So what I hope to do is share with you some of the features that sit under these categories, show you how some of these tools work, and then hopefully that inspires you about how you can use those tools in your business or in your applications. And the critical thing that I want to highlight is you don't need machine learning experience, you don't need AI experience. If you can write some code, and even in some cases you don't even need to write code, then you can access this technology. So the other thing I want to highlight before we dive into it is everything I show you tonight is exactly what Microsoft uses for all of our services. So in PowerPoint, for example, I don't remember what language I've got selected here. Let's see how we go. I've got it in Arabic, I think. These subtitles that are being generated are using the same AI technology that you can grab from Azure to use in your applications as well. And so my personal favorite is the Xbox on the right there. Xbox's recommendation system are the exact same recommendation APIs that we offer you as well. So whether you frame it as eat our own dog food, drink our own champagne, everything that we provide you as a tool is the exact same content that Microsoft uses as well. And I don't know if any of you can speak Arabic, but apparently that's really like a pretty decent translation, so I'm told. So just so you have the confidence that everything we build is the exact same tools that you use as well. So as I said, we're going to walk through some of these categories. The way I'm going to structure some of these modules is I'm going to talk about the category of services. I'm going to talk about a couple of things it can do. We're then going to walk through just a really basic architecture so you can see how it fits into the flow of an application. I'll tell a little story about some customers who are doing it, and then I'm actually going to show you an example of either how you can build one of these tools yourself, or how you can go into and write some code to basically implement it into your application. So hopefully that sounds good. I'm going to have a swig of water, and we're going to dive into it. Remember, questions at any time. Also happy to answer any general AI questions that you have as well, if anything is a bit uncertain for you. So the first category of AI services I want to talk about is vision. And this is probably one of the most popular categories that I see everyone from startups to organizations utilizing. Vision, when you think about AI, things like being able to detect objects in images, being able to read text off a page, being able to identify faces, identify emotions, read handwriting, all this sort of stuff. So vision is an immensely popular category that spans a wide array of industries. And so many of you might be building applications or startups that are in manufacturing or in retail, or even in organizations like financial institutions. They're looking to use vision-like AI to read information from forms or read information from documents, and that uses some of this technology here. And just so you can see how these sort of pieces together, what I've got here is an example that's actually based on a customer where we worked with them to implement a claims processing application. So they used to have a system where a claim would come in from a customer. It would actually get attached to an email and get emailed to someone. And then someone would physically have to read that attachment on the email and do something with it. This is, of course, not a scalable process. And particularly when things like COVID and that appear in the world, the ability to process this information just isn't viable by having humans in the loop. So instead, what they've done is they actually pass the claim or the email to a vision AI service. In this case, what it does is it reads through the information off of the email, because sometimes there's photos, sometimes people write on post-it notes, they stick that and send it to their insurance company, etc. They then have to basically extract the information from that email or from that photo, then that gives them a digital copy that they can analyze and automatically triage based on whatever information comes out of those images or comes out of that document. So all of a sudden, you've gone from having a human read every single object or every single email that comes through, and now you have the ability for an AI to handle the process and flag particular words or flag particular claims so that humans can spend more time on those more important claims rather than having to read through every piece themselves. And a great example of a customer who's using AI, Vision AI from Microsoft, is actually Uber. So Uber, everyone's probably used an Uber or a similar competitive service. They were basically having a challenge where their application was not verifying who was actually driving the car. So when people were getting in, they weren't confident that the driver was who they said they were, and so it was a big risk for maybe the drivers, maybe the company, the people certainly taking the ride through Uber. So they took our Vision service, and I'll show you what that is in a moment. And they basically added it in as a feature to their application. They didn't have to custom train a model. They didn't have to build, spend hours and hours of time, thousands of dollars training a model. They grabbed the Vision service from Microsoft. They put it into their application. It's a few lines of code, a wrapper with the UI, and away that you go. So just so you can see that it's not even just necessarily small companies or big lumbering companies that are using this. Even companies like Uber, who are leaders in AI, arguably AI companies, are using these pre-built services. I'm actually going to show you a demo of how you can use this capability yourself. Before that, I see we've got a question from Xiaoyong Chu about chatbots. So I'm actually going to go into chatbots a little bit later on in the session. So we'll come back to your question, Xiaoyong, but I've noted it there, so we'll return to it. So I'm going to show you a super quick demo because this is all just theory at the moment, right? This is like, Matt, this sounds really cool. Like, I don't need to be a data scientist to train a model, but how do I actually use it? Well, the service in particular that I'm going to show you now is a service called Custom Vision. And this is a awesome service that has this little interface where we can basically create object detection models. So if we want to detect flowers in an image, if we want to tell if someone's wearing a red shirt or a blue shirt, we can use this tool to train our own model for our own specific use case. And it's easy as just creating a project, clicking a few buttons and clicking create, and away you go. And what I've actually done is I've prepared one earlier. It's cricket detection. What I've created is a model that helps detect between the Australian cricket team and the India cricket team. And so you can see here, all I've done is load up a bunch of images. So I've got about 15 or so, maybe 16 images here. And I'm going to load up one more just so you can see what the what it looks like. Which one haven't I used? Let's go here. So all I do is I upload these images. Let's go to the challenge with live demos. Let's see which one I haven't used. So we've uploaded an image. We click on the image and we simply tell the AI, this is Australia, and this is India. So all I've done is I've created those tags previously where I've just typed in the word Australia, typed in the word India, and I click a button and I've labeled these images all of a sudden. Then to train my model, I simply go train, and that's going to go away. And that's now going to train a model to detect from those images who's from the Australian team and who's from the India team. Now, I did prepare one earlier because it takes about 10, 15 minutes to train, right? So I did prepare one earlier. Let's go with number 5. And here you can see it's kind of worked out. If I bump up these threshold values here a little bit, whoops. So there you go. So it's 96% sure that this is a member from the India team. There's kind of 50% sure that this is a member of the Australia team. And so what this tells us is maybe we need a few more examples from the Australia team. But we've just trained a model to detect objects in images without any code, without any knowledge of data science at all. And then to deploy this, we can just we can just export the model. So we've got like a quick test here where we can test it. But then once it finishes training, we can just export it into whatever format we want. So if we're building an application in JavaScript, we're building an application for iOS, we can take this model, all the code, and away we go. We can use it. So it is incredibly powerful. This is how I and my peers, we start vision projects. When a customer tells us, Matt, I've got a manufacturing line and I want to detect faults in the objects that are produced. Cool. Grab some images, let's load it in and see what works. What's awesome for startups as well is this has a very generous free tier. So if you wanted to play around with it, it is very generous. But you can see how easy it is to get started. And it even gives you that URL so you can send it images if you don't want to put it in an application. So it's incredible. The other one I wanted to quickly show you was the character recognition one, basically optical character recognition. And so this one's just as easy. So when you send it an image, it simply extracts the text for you, which is incredible. But what you're seeing here is the visual interface. For all of you developers or you coders out there, there's actually an SDK, well, there we go, that you can use that gives you the same sort of results. And so let me just clear this. And I'll show you how easy it is to build into your application. So all we've done here is import a couple of components of the SDK. We've given it our credentials, which I've copied up here. And then we simply say, take this image, go read it, basically give me the results back, and then print the lines of text. So what we've done here is package up the SDK and basically said, if here's an image, give me the result back. And if we then run this, you can see here it's reading the folder. It's reading the file, and you'll see actually how complex this image is. This is an image I pulled of a Steve Jobs quote, and it's actually really messy. Like it's not an easy image to read. Look at all these crazy fonts. Look at all these shifts in color. Look at all these, the layout of it. Yet our system is able to extract this text very, like I would say, with over 90% accuracy, and a human wouldn't even read it 100% right. So that's how easy it is to build something like character recognition or vision into your application. It's not about going and spending hours training a model. It's not about going and having, data scientists and whatnot. But instead, it's about looking at the use case. What do you want to achieve? I want to read text from an object. I want to be able to detect objects in an image, and then going and using these developer resources to be able to build them into your application. So that's a quick round the grounds on vision. Before I move to speech-based use cases, any questions on vision, or does anyone have any use cases that requires vision that this might be able to help them with? No? Okay. Hopefully you're all just shocked with interest and you're like, wow, I can't wait to get started. Matt, hurry up and finish so I can get in and try these links. I've got the links here as well. So if you wanted to go and use any of these services, all of the links there are there for you. And I know I said Custom Vision has quite a generous free tier. To be honest, most of the Azure AI services have a nice free tier. So even if you want to go and experiment and play around, you can do it basically with little to no upfront costs as well. Aditi says, what if we have multiple problems, like a picture with numbers, quotes, as well as mini images? Not a problem at all. So you can actually build a pipeline to run multiple different components of this. So if you had something that was, you wanted to detect the objects in an image, and then you wanted to extract the text from the image, etc., you can just run them in sequence, pass one output to the other, etc. So you can queue these up as much as you need. So what you wouldn't be able to do is like cut specific portions of the image. That becomes a little bit more complicated. But what you can do is get those nice boxes around things that you detect, and be able to read the language from it or whatever you need. So you can actually queue these up in multiple ways. Hopefully that answers your question, Aditi. But yeah, these are really easy to queue up, and it's all from the same service. Can we read a capture using this as well? I haven't tried, but my bet would be it's actually surprisingly good. If it can read my handwriting, it can probably read the captcha. And so I would bet that there's probably, I mean, they're specifically designed to beat AI and things like that, but I reckon it'd give it a pretty good shot depending on the captcha. How many languages can be used using computer vision? Depending on if it's like text. So if it's not handwriting, if it's text, Rahul, I believe it's over 40 languages. Like we have a huge number of languages. If it's written languages, that's a much smaller list because they're far more difficult to build models for. And so things like simplified Chinese, things like English, etc., they're covered under the handwriting. But like Japanese, for example, we have Japanese print is covered, but Japanese handwriting is to be released in the next few months. That's one that's coming out. But there's a link with all of the information, and we actually have a list of all of the languages that we support as well, which actually leads me really nicely to my next topic, which is speech, because we actually have the highest number of supported languages in our speech services, which is over 90. And I challenge anyone to list 90 different languages that they know, because there's languages on there I never even knew existed. We even cover Klingon for all of you Star Trek fans out there. So we've spoken about speech. We've spoken about vision, but actually speech is quite a common use case. So either being able to identify who is speaking for the purposes of identification, or being able to read out some kind of text. And a lot of brands are doing this now to create a new way to interact with customers, particularly this service here called Custom Neural Voice, which is basically being able to submit audio files and create your own AI voice that you can then just pass information to, and it'll read it out for you. So you only need sort of several minutes of audio to create your own custom voice. And the way we're seeing some of these services being used, in this case, this speech to text use case, we're seeing it where they're taking in information from podcasters and they're converting that speech into text on the fly and being able to stream that to the podcast audiences around the globe. And so companies like Spotify use these services. They actually use it for an editing tool where if anyone's edited a podcast or edited kind of audio, you need to go through and look at all the different charts and diagrams. They've gone, well, why can't we have Word, but for podcasts? So it actually transcribes your entire podcast and lets you edit it according to the words that are in front of you, not the audio files at the top, and automatically lets you chop and change. And that's through our speech services that we have available. A couple of other quick ones. Twitter, if you've used Twitter Spaces, which was their response to Clubhouse, Twitter needed to get something out quick. They needed to get out something that would recognize speech, etc. And instead of relying on their own thousands of data scientists, they just went with Azure. They just went with Microsoft speech services that I'm going to show you in about 30 seconds. Peloton, same deal. They have had an absolute boom through the pandemic, and they required captioning on their videos that were going into homes. Now, that's a very, very complicated use case. Think of all the different languages and accents and how accurate the translation needs to be from the speech to text. In this case, they've used the Azure services and now pushed that out to homes around the globe. Took them a couple of months rather than a couple of years to train the model. So again, just kind of reinforcing that you don't need to go and build your own stuff. Big companies with thousands of data scientists are choosing to use this, and they're the exact same services that you have available as well. And we have a question from Andy. How accurate is speaker recognition with transcription? We've tried a few and they mix up speakers a bit. Andy, the challenge you have with speaker recognition is you do need audio samples to better train a model to detect who's speaking. I'd like to put my hand up and say Azure is the most accurate. I don't have any data to back that up though, but we do use it for things like Teams. So in Teams, you can do speaker recognition for like transcribing who's in a call, and it doesn't necessarily assign names, but it knows who's a different person compared to who else is speaking. And so we use that as part of our Teams functionality, and it seems to work pretty reliably as part of that. So that's at the out of the box. But if you did want that really accurate model where it does, for example, you're trying to do like, I don't know, speech recognition for identifying an individual in like an app or something like that, you would actually need audio samples to make sure it's highly accurate for that individual. But the awesome thing is you don't need to train a model for that. You can just take the audio samples, upload them to Azure, and it'll train the model for you. So you don't need to worry about all the code. You don't need to worry about the notebooks, managing the versioning of the models. You just take the audio files and you upload them to the Azure language service, and it does that for you. So definitely give it a go, Andy. I'd be very keen to hear how you go with the process. Aditi says, can we transcribe a video from a virtual meeting platform, say Zoom? Absolutely. The awesome thing about these tools is although they live in Azure, you can use them anywhere. And so the example I gave you before about Spotify, for this particular component, they were actually hosted on a competitive cloud. All their data sat with someone else, yet they chose to use the Azure services because it's just an SDK. It's just an API. So you can call it from absolutely anywhere and still be able to get the results. So your data doesn't have to sit in Azure. Your data doesn't have to sit on one of our data centers. It can sit literally anywhere, and you can still get the same functionality. So yes, Aditi, absolutely, you can do the transcription from video platforms. If you're, capturing video feeds from Zoom and then wanting to process them, yes, that absolutely can be done, even if you're hosted on premise or in another cloud. So I'm going to show you a super quick demo of speech services. And again, I'm going to show you the visual interface just because it makes for a better presentation than sitting and looking at code. But I want you to know that all this stuff can be done through an SDK, a software development kit, just as easily as the Vision one. So what I've got here is some text. The text was actually generated by GPT-3, and if we've got time, we'll touch on that a little bit later. But what I've been able to do is write out this text and then basically select a persona for who I want to read this text. So in this case, I've selected Michelle, who speaks in English, female voice, and will read out the topic for me.
Hello, my name is Dr. Ellie, and I am a doctor of AI. I would like to explain how AI works in the simplest way possible for you all.
So that's good, right? Like it sounds a little robotic, but that's pretty cool that we can just pass it the text and it'll read it out. What's even cooler is I don't really like the way that this voice read out the word doctor. And I actually want to change that. I want to change the way it pronounces the word doctor.
Doctor.
So at the moment it says doctor. It's all flat. But what I can do is that I can actually teach it to pronounce the word in a different way. So maybe I want it to say doctor and go up and then down.
Doctor. Doctor.
So doctor.
Doctor.
Doctor. And I can do that per word as I go in this studio. So I can actually start crafting a voice very specific to my use case. And now when this voice approaches that word again, it'll pronounce it in the way that I want it to. Don't need development skills, don't need AI skills, but I can now create a voice for my application that can be built in. Can be built into my application seamlessly, but with the pronunciation that I want, which is super, super important. So you're not stuck into these robotic voices that you get sometimes. You can just you can use your own personal preference. But what's even cooler here is you've just heard Michelle speak. But what I'm going to do is actually copy some text, and I'm going to have a different voice. Speak it. So we're going to go here. We're going to go. Here's where the live demo starts to fall apart. No, here we go. All right. So I'm going to pick, say, Chinese. Right. Let's go Chinese Mandarin. Let's pick Yunxi. So now I have Yunxi being able to speak this.
Machine learning comes into play when AI learns about its environment through patterns it observes in data, which will lead to better outcomes in the future.
So just like that, I've been able to have a completely different voice. But what's even cooler is I can then translate that text into a language, say, actually in Chinese, and then have Yunxi speak that out.
当人工智能通过它在数据中观察到的模式来了解其环境时
So if you're looking at going global, if you're looking at expanding your audience base and having this speech interface, This is an all-in-one. And again, you're not having to train all these models. You're not having to build all these data sets. It's done for you. You just need to provide the text and you need to tweak it according to what you want for your brand or for your customer experience. And so in this example, we've been able to change the voice that's spoken. We're able to change the language that's spoken. We're able to have it speak English and Chinese all in the same system. And this is something that we're seeing as quite a big trend, as I've mentioned, because people want a different way to interact with their audiences, their customers, and speech seems to be one that's really popping up, particularly with, you know, in-home speakers, AI systems, etc. Voice is becoming a more appropriate way to interact with brands. So, and then Andy says, we've a speech solution in production. A major issue is pause. We have to wait for a pause before we assume that customers stop talking, which means we respond back to them after a long wait. Andy, that's tough. I think that has to do with the ambient noise tolerance that the system starts at. But I've actually got a story in a moment, and I'll just tell it now because we're always running short on time. VW actually use this in their vehicle. So when you're speaking into the AI into the vehicle, it's actually doing all of its translation. It's doing all of its word recognition in vehicle using these same services. So the lag and the response time is almost non-existent. They've had to account for over 40 billion different words with variations and tones and all this sort of stuff. And you think about the different parts, like if you're speaking to your vehicle and you're saying this part of my car is broken, this is the model of the car, you can do it in French and Japanese, in English and Spanish. You can have all the different tones and dictations, etc. They all do that in vehicle using this same system. And so if you're having some of these challenges around latency or quality, I would highly recommend giving these a crack because some of the biggest organizations on the globe use these tools as well. And the benefit is you can take it from Azure and actually run it, you know, on premise, or in this case in vehicle, which really helps with that quality and that lag. And it's the same approach. It's the same SDK. It's the same system. So again, you don't need to be a data scientist to go and get the benefits of it. So hopefully that's inspired you for speech. Before we move to language, I'm going to take another sip of water and see if there are any questions on vision or speech, or if that's inspired kind of any ideas or thoughts. Okay. This next topic is also one that's super important, and I imagine will be very important for all of you creating startups, because the most common use case I see for language AI is processing feedback, processing customer interactions, processing sales interactions. So if I'm receiving calls from a customer, I'm receiving text messages, emails, etc., some form of interaction, I can either transcribe that speech or capture that text, but then I want to mine through that information. I want to find out, was the customer happy? Was the customer sad? Did we satisfy their request? What types of words did they use? How did they talk about the product? This is a major wave we're seeing for, again, it's kind of retail, finance, but any organization that's trying to be as customer-led as possible is implementing this type of solution. Now, what we mean by language is just that it's mainly text analytics. So being able to, as I said, detect sentiment, but then detect particular phrases, particular words, or what we call entities, which are key items that appear in the text. Translation is considered part of this as well. So being able to translate from you know, the large array of language, I think it was over 40 languages into English or into another language. We actually just released a brand new model, which is not part of the service just yet, which basically means you don't have to translate to English in between. It was the first time in the world this has been done, where you can translate from any other language to any other language, which is phenomenal. And you'll see that in the product in the coming months and years. But this is all about how do you actually understand what's being said from the text, and how do you use that information to create insights about your customers or make decisions about your business. And a great example is the call center. So you probably don't have call centers if you're a startup, but you can think of this as just any sort of feedback or verbatim input from a customer. But a lot of bigger organizations are looking at call centers because they basically want to record the transaction between the customer and the agent. But then usually what happens is that just sits in the notes, or that just sits on a database somewhere. So what we're helping them do is, instead of just going from capturing it and then putting it in a Power BI dashboard or something. All we do is we interject the AI services in between to pass through the information and enrich it, is the phrase that we call it. We enrich the data with insights, with the specific call outs about the entities, with the specific sentiment, etc. Here's that VW1 I was talking about, where they do the analysis of the words as well. So it's not just about transcribing and translating, but they're also trying to find out how is the customer feeling when they're interacting with the vehicle. And this has led to obviously increases in customer satisfaction, but also increased insight into the future vehicles that VW produce as well. And what I'm going to show you is a little like the first demo. So in this case, we have this visual interface, right? This is oh, sorry, before I do that, I think there was a question. No, someone put the hand down. So in this instance, we have this huge body of text, right? This is a review that comes from a restaurant. And usually what we do is we'd store this as free text. Maybe someone would manually read through it. Maybe someone would get around to reading it. I don't know. But it doesn't have to be dark data. It doesn't have to sit there and be underutilized. What we can do is leverage, in this case, the visual interface. We run it through our cognitive services, and here you can see it's extracted all of these great bits of information from what is quite a long review. So we can identify organizations, locations, Seattle, times, date times, events, dinner parties, the cook, the locations, the kitchen, the name is John Doe, pasta is a product, phone numbers, ordering is of emails, etc. So all of a sudden we've gone from this body of text, which is just too much information, to being able to extract the key pieces that we need. And so this is, as I said, called entity recognition. This is about identifying key words or key phrases in the text and being able to tag them and say these are locations or people or dates or products, etc., etc. You can also train your own. So if you have specific words for your organization, if you've got a specific product name that doesn't exist in any other data set that's out there, you can train this model to recognize that word using the visual interface as well. I don't have a demo for that, unfortunately, but you can see here there's a custom named entity recognition. So this is being able to I think I need to reload my thing, but it lets you build your own language model to detect specific words or phrases for your use case, which is super interesting. To quickly show you again, just to keep reinforcing the point how easy this is, just back to the code for all the coders on the call. Again, it's just importing an SDK. It's just creating a little client that can handle the requests with those credentials. It's then passing it the information, and then basically returning the result. And so if I clear this again, and I go next demo, you can see here that information. This is the exact same input. We get it out, and this is a JSON file, right? So we can store this somewhere. We can put it in a Power BI. We can put it in some sort of visualization. But you can see it gives us the text. It gives us the confidence of the category. It gives us how long it is, etc., etc. And so to be able to build this into a workflow is literally that easy. Although this looks kind of long with 20 or so lines of code, it's actually just a few lines of code to be able to actually get started with it, which is super impressive. And I would highly recommend, maybe if it's not part of your core business, but most certainly in the next couple of months or in the midterm, you want to start looking at analyzing feedback or analyzing text that customers or people are sending you, because it makes your ability to respond to information so much better. It makes you more impactful as an organization, because you're able to understand what your customers are saying without needing to scale your back of house team to be able to read all of the inputs. And it's literally just a couple of lines of code and away you go. So that's the speech, the language side of things. The other one to talk about is bots, which I know is a hot topic. Again, before I move to bots, does anyone have any questions on text analytics or any sort of analyzing any sort of input from customers using that language API? No? Okay, cool. So we're making all right time. I think we'll finish right on the top of the hour, but of course, jump in with questions if you've got them. So bots is a super hot topic. Bots is something that we speak about almost every day, again, with every customer from any size, from startups all the way to large organizations. And it's typically as an interface. I'm actually going to change these slides around. So bots are a way for customers to interact with your organization. And so in this architecture here, you see we've got these bots as a front end for customers, but behind the scenes is actually where the magic happens. So things like the text analytics, things like language understanding, et cetera, inputting the data sources, et cetera. A lot of the setup actually goes in the back end. The actual chatbot itself is just an interface. And so you need to design the conversation flow of the chatbot. Obviously, what happens when you say hello, what happens if someone asks a question. But all you're doing with a chatbot is basically accessing information that's behind your organization or already in your data set, or maybe it's calling an API or something like that. So the thing about chatbots is a lot of it's kind of solved. A lot of it is really well known. A lot of it is been done 1,000 times before. And so when I speak to a lot of customers, they're looking to build their own, write their own chatbots or build their own language models for chatbots. You don't need to do that. There's so many tools out there. I'm going to show you a couple in a second that helps you build these chatbots so easily, but also lets you imbue your own personality, lets you phrase the questions and the flow yourself, again, without needing to be a developer or a data scientist. And before I go into it, I'm going to loop back to Xiaoyong's question. How do we QA deep learning chatbots, since chatbot response should be different each time? Also in a business, how do we write test alerts to warn us when a chatbot produces answers that are not correct? Really good questions, right? Basically, how do you make sure that the answers your bots are giving are well received by the customer and not too wacky? And I'm actually going to show you an example, again, a live demo, so fingers crossed, of that in a moment, where we're actually going to build a backend for a bot that answers questions for us. I'm going to show you how you can tune the bot to answer questions better. The big thing I'll say about chatbots is the first time you launch it, it's going to be underwhelming. It's going to suck. It's not going to hit the level of expectation that you or your customers have, and it's because bots need tweaking. They need massaging. They need guidance on how to better answer questions. And so going through a bit of a rigorous QA process internally, quality assurance, having people actually interact with the bot and having that feedback loop of saying, actually, that wasn't the best answer, maybe try this one instead, is the way you're going to get better results with chatbots. But I've seen far too many people get really excited about chatbots and then be very disappointed with the result because in the first 2 months, it never answers a question correctly. But if you have the system in place, it learns how to better answer questions, and then ultimately you get the results and the efficiency that you need. Which is why I'm also saying a lot of the work happens behind the scenes, not with the bot itself. The bot's simply most of the time just grabbing information for you and presenting it in an interface. So a lot of the work actually happens behind the scenes rather than the bot itself. Just keeping the flow of the modules, the Center for Disease Control actually used Azure to answer questions about COVID. We basically span up a bot for them in a couple of days, I think it was, and then being able to answer questions about COVID vaccinations, about what to do if you have symptoms, where's your nearest vaccination center, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really easy to get started with bots. It's really easy to scale, particularly with some of the tools that I'll show you in a moment. Well, actually now. So the one example I'm going to show you is a Q&A bot, because that seems to be the one that people want to try and attack first. Is how do we reduce the amount of time it spends, our staff spends or I spend answering questions that are routine or really common, or can be documented and the bot just kind of interacts with them. So I'm going to show you a service called Q&A Maker. And this is exactly as it sounds. It creates a Q&A style chatbot based on an input. And so again, a visual interface. This can all be done through an SDK or an API. All we do is we deploy the service. We pick to tell it where to look in Azure for the service that we've deployed. We build a knowledge base, which is basically the information that our chatbot's going to be accessing. And then we give it some information. So we can either upload documents, we can manually write things out. In this case, I'm actually going to jump to a company who has an FAQ page. And I'm just going to copy this FAQ page and paste it into here. And then we're going to give the bot a personality. So again, in that whole sort of that whole position of how do we create a personality for our brand, we can be witty, we can be friendly, we can be professional, we can be caring, etc., etc. I always like the witty one because it comes back with really snappy remarks. But let's just pick this for our persona. We click create, and what it's doing now is it's passing through the information of that website. It's reading through, and it's actually creating the backend for the bot for us. And I should have checked how long this will take actually. So let's, there we go, it's done. So what this has done is you can see it's extracted the questions from the FAQ site, it's extracted the answers, and what we now have is basically the basics of a bot. So over here I can test it, and I can say, hello, and the bot says, hey, and we can ask it a question. Let's pick one of these. Where is Visa available? And it tells us you can enjoy Visa whenever you see this icon, blah, 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 blah. Okay, that's pretty cool. How do I sign up for Visa? Boom, it's picked an answer. Now, I'm not sure if this is accurate or not, but let's pretend that it didn't give us the right answer. Let's say, actually, no, bot, you didn't pick the right piece of information. We can go in and inspect, and we can see what other answers it was considering. So in this case, we can either provide alternative phrasings for the question. So if the bot sees this question again, it can liken it to other phrases. So how do I sign up? Or I can say, like, where do I sign up? Or, you know, is it easy to sign up? Just different permutations. We don't have to enter these manually either. It's pretty easy to automate these from the customers too, from the chat logs. But then let's say, I mean, this isn't a good example because it hasn't given us actual answers, but it's only a confidence score of 42 out of 100. So let's say one of these other answers was better. We could actually click it and tell the bot, this is the better answer to that question. This is more appropriate. Now, in this case, it doesn't actually make sense, but for the purpose of the demo, you get what I mean? We're picking a different answer. It originally had this one, but we're saying, actually, come back with a weird response. Don't answer that one. And then from there, we go save and train. And what this will do is it's teaching the bot, okay, these are the inputs. These are the similar inputs. These are the answers I should give, etc., etc. We'll start again. We'll say hi. And we'll say, is it easy to sign up? Boom. It's given us that response that we selected before. So this is a new input that we trained it to learn on. It's a new answer we told it to give, and it's just learnt it. Now, if we wanted to deploy it, we just click publish, and what this will do is then give us an API that our bot can then interact with. This may take a few moments, so I won't let this hang because it's basically building the resources on the back end to be able to handle the requests back and forth between the chatbot. But what you've seen there is literally in a couple of minutes, I've just built a Q&A bot for my brand where I can custom train. No, it's got an error. Oh, that's because I'm using the free tier and I've used it too much today. But as you can see, we have trained a bot on a knowledge base it's never seen before. It's passed through information. We can teach it specific answers. But if you're looking for a more visual way to do it as well, we also have a bot composer where you can actually craft the flow of the chatbot. And so here is actually the back end. Here's the back end of the bot where what it's done is it's auto created this, but we can create it ourselves. We can create this flow to say what happens if a customer says this, what happens if a customer says that, etc. So if it didn't understand, here's what happens. You know, here is the flow for what to do when it receives an answer, etc. And so you can drag and drop this flow into here. You can go in and write code if you want for particular values, etc. So this is where you can really get into the nitty-gritty from the bot you just deployed. And so again, starting off with this quick interface, with this visual interface, incredibly powerful, but then giving you control to be able to manipulate it behind the scenes as well. If you want a more complex flow, or if you want to call your own deep learning model, or if you want to do your own interaction, say you've got an API interaction into a SAP backend or a CRM or something like that, you can build this here, but you can use that interface to create something super easy from the start. I know there was a whirlwind tour of bots, but I'm just gonna have a quick look if there's any questions. No. We only have a couple of minutes left for content, and then I'm happy to stay on for the entirety of the 30 minutes and answer questions, or we can keep it as short as you want. One thing that I did want to tease for people who are like, Matt, this is cool, but like, come on, you're Microsoft. Like, what are you looking at? What's coming? Well, like, this is stuff that I've already thought about for my application. What should I be thinking about next? And so just in the last couple of minutes, I want to show you some of these things. One of them is OpenAI, which is an incredibly powerful model. So not to get too deep into the world of models, but basically way back in 2018, there was a language generation model that had 340 million parameters. And basically, you can think of the more parameters, the more creative and accurate and interesting the AI will be. So back in 2018, Google released a bot called BERT, which was language processing. Then 2 years later, it went from 340 million to 17 billion parameters. And then in the same year, it went from 17 to 175 billion. So 10x the number of parameters. And then just a year later, they're at 530 billion parameters. So these are models that are enormous. Like, you wouldn't be able to put these on a computer. You wouldn't be able to run them yourself. But what we're doing at Microsoft is giving you access to them. And what I'm going to do is I'm not going to play this video. And my friend will be very disappointed that I didn't play her video all the way. But I'm going to see if I can quickly just show you what's possible with some of this stuff. Let's see if I can do this. It's not going to play for me. That's all right. But basically, this video, which we'll share with the slide deck afterwards, lets you generate code.
Powered by the OpenAI Codex model running on Azure.
That's all right.
Copilot helps developers write code fast.
Here we go. So in this video, what she's doing is she's just writing what she wants in the application, and then GPT-3 is actually writing the code for her. So she writes, build me a component that lets me play a video from this URL. And then she hits enter, and then GPT-3 will write all that code for her. Boom, there it is. And then she goes in, she tweaks a couple of settings, and away she goes. That application's now being built. Then GPT-3 can also do things like, in this example, it takes the transcription of what the commentators are saying and writes it down, publishes it in a summary, so that you're not having to listen to a continuous audio stream. Instead, you get a summary of the highlights of what's happening minute by minute throughout the game. But then it doesn't only do that, it also summarizes those summaries and generates an article. Where is it? Generates an article that then gets published on a news site as well. So GPT-3 has basically written this application. It's then transcribing and aggregating what's coming from the commentators about describing what's happening in the game. It knows what's interesting. It knows what's unique. And so that makes it a compelling, say, Twitter feed or some kind of interaction. It then takes its summaries and writes an article summarizing the entire game for you, all through the same model. So this is outstandingly powerful. It's just become available to the general public in beta as well. So if this sort of thing is interesting to you, definitely go have a play with OpenAI, with the beta, etc. We're right on time, so I'm actually not going to touch on the last topic of reinforcement learning. Will says, would be great to hear about the decision category. Will, I know that that's the final category of services. We didn't have enough time. I focused on some other things today, but we'll share some links in this deck afterwards for you to be able to have a look through what's happening in the decision category as well. So we're basically bang on time. The one thing I will get out there to you all is using this technology is awesome, but it also comes with a huge responsibility. And at Microsoft, we take that responsibility very seriously. So all of the models that you see, all of the tools that I've shown you tonight have actually gone through a really rigorous internal vetting process to try and be as ethical as possible. And what we mean by that is as free from bias as possible, as accurate as it can be where possible, to make sure that these technologies, we've kind of vetted them for, how much damage could someone do, if they got this model. And so things like facial recognition, we actually won't provide that to governments or police bodies because it can be used in the wrong way to incriminate, the wrong person or make decisions about people that we don't think can be entirely accurate. So we actually put a lot of governance around the availability of our models. And I'd encourage all of you, it may seem like a little bit of extra effort, but if you're using AI in your applications, in your businesses, stop to think what the impact will be if the AI makes the wrong decision, or who might be impacted if the AI makes the wrong decision. And make sure you weigh that up when you're implementing AI. Now, 9 times out of 10, if you're just implementing some sort of object recognition model, it's not going to be a problem. But if you're starting to do things with customer data, if you're starting to make decisions about your customers relying on the AI, make sure you stop to have a think about what might go wrong. If the AI makes a poor decision, even if it's 0.1% of the time and the rest of the time it's accurate, what could that impact be? And are you willing to accept that risk? Because we can't entirely remove the risk from AI, but we can put it in a manner that's acceptable for our customers and acceptable for ourselves, and as equitable as possible. Sorry, was there a question on that? No? We have a whole series of tools and frameworks and things like that you can use. I'm not going to go into that now, but that is bang on 6. I can't believe we made it through most of the content in that period of time. So we basically have it open for questions now, and I know that was a real rapid run through of a lot of stuff, but hopefully what that's shown you is a couple of things. One, it's given you a bit of an overview of the Azure services, the Azure portfolio, which is always good. 2, it's shown you some of the big categories of how people are using AI, but most importantly, it's shown you that it's super easy to go and do this stuff that can be very impactful. And this isn't something that, only small companies use. Big companies are using the same services that you can use for your application. The time, the cost saving, and the performance are all there. And so the only limitation really is what you're going to use it for. And so hopefully that's inspired some new ideas or some new features, or helped you with something you're trying to do with your startup. And so that's the end of the, formal content, but more than happy to hang around for questions or comments from anyone on the call. So it's over to you. What questions do you have?
Just while we're waiting for everybody to find their chops, I just want to say, what a session, electrifying. And I think the reason that I always trip over Matt's actual title is because I just always plug in there AI rockstar. Super clear, really easy to digest. I think everybody who's been here today has already got a whole lot out of that session. So guys, do take this opportunity to ask Matt questions. Go for it, either in the chat or unmute yourself. And we'll sort of open up the floor.
After that, you can also switch on your videos. It would be great to see you all. Maybe if you give a line or two of an introduction, and then we can take it from there.
Just getting a few people agreeing with the rockstar comment.
Yeah.
And David.
Hey, David.
How are you going? Great, Matt. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
AI chatbot company in hotels using AI.
Very nice. So. Are you using an AI framework? Are you building your own? How are you approaching the chatbot?
I'm the dodgy CEO who's sales. Or not, yeah. But my partner's on the line. The CTO's somewhere there, Andy, if you want to show your face. He's the brains behind it, and he asked the hard questions about voice.
Nice. Yeah, really good questions coming through from Andy about the voice and the speech to text and that. If you're a chatbot company, I think you're in a slightly different position to a lot of other companies, because you're offering that experience around chatbots, right? And so the quality of your text analytics, the quality of maybe you're offering speech to text capabilities to the chatbot as well, needs to be at that higher expectation. So you can use some of these services. We have a very popular chatbot company, may or may not be a competitor, like LiveTiles is a big company that does this sort of stuff. They use all of these services on their back end as well. They actually use some of our bot framework stuff as well. So just because you're building a bot in this space doesn't mean you can't take full advantage of these frameworks or these services as well. So yeah, definitely think about where they might be able to plug in and either save you some time or save you some money and still help you achieve the performance you need.
Yeah, this is Andy here. So David is my CEO. You have definitely given him some ideas, so I have more work for him, I'm pretty sure. We actually used bot framework, Microsoft Lewis, and a lot text analytics and a lot of services. So we have played around a lot and been doing it from last 2-3 years. There are some very, very unique challenges we have. which, I don't want to raise those questions. They are very, very detailed, but there are some really tricky situations that we stumble upon. And we have kind of 4 or 5 developers who whole day work on bot frameworks, and also we have very tricky situations that we definitely can take your help on.
Well, Andy, sounds like a great opportunity for a follow-up chat. Let's connect one-on-one or one-on multiple if you want to bring along some of the folks. And can't promise that I can answer all the questions for you, but at least if I know where you're having some of the challenges, I'm able to get some folk to help out. So yeah, definitely follow up with me afterwards, and let's set up that time to chat.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy.
Matt, a quick one just on my side. You mentioned about, AI ethics and how important it is because it's a bell you can't unring once you, go a certain distance. Yeah. Any suggestions on where to start with a framework for individual startups if they want to sort of be able to check themselves before they wreck themselves? Where might they start? What might they put in place?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Kathy, and the reality is the frameworks that large organizations use are the same frameworks that startups can use. And for me, almost for startups, there's a little bit more on the line as well, particularly if you're B2B, because if you have something that compromises a responsible AI policy, you can potentially impact multiple brands as well as your own. So it's even more important for startups, particularly in the B2B space, to have this type of responsible AI framework or this responsible AI checkpoint whenever they use AI. I'm going to post a link in the chat, which is to a free resource online from Microsoft. It's called the AI Business School. That gives you templates, that gives you frameworks, it gives you stories of how to go about approaching building a responsible AI framework for your organization without making it burdensome. Like I feel like sometimes responsible AI kind of gets lumped into the same category as security sometimes, where people are like, it's too hard, we'll do it after the fact. But to your point, Kathy, it's too late after the fact. You need to do it in the moment to actually make it effective. And so having that responsible AI conversation now, or having the framework conversation now, is super important. And it comes down to a couple of different categories. It's like, what tools do you want to do? How much risk are you willing to take on? Some of those things I made, points I made in the call as well, around just asking yourself a question of, if this AI makes a bad decision, who is impacted? That can be the most basic responsible AI strategy that you have. The most important thing is that you're asking the question. I also have a link, but I don't have it off the top of my head, which is actually responsible AI design guidelines. So if you want to move from building a strategy to actually building a responsible AI product, that is a product that is within the no longer accessible. Okay, thanks, Shravan. I'll find the updated link for that. But if you want to build a product that is compliant with the best practices for responsible AI, there's a series of questions and decision points that you have throughout the product design process. So I'll grab that link, I'll slide into the deck, and so when we share it out, you can all see some of those questions. And it's little things like, for my chatbot, at what point should I tell the customer that they're interacting with a chatbot? Or if I produce this custom neural voice that speaks to my customer, do I need to tell them that that's not a real person, that that's actually an AI voice? And so it's these little decision factors along the way, which you might not think are that important, but can have a profound impact on customer experience and, therefore your brand and whatnot. So there's a whole topic you can dive into, but hopefully that sort of answers your question, Kathy, and I'll get those links for everyone as well.
Definitely. Cool. Another question snuck in there in between us chatting from Aditi.
Yeah.
Hi, Matt. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yep. Hi, Aditi.
Yeah. But so I wanted to know, what is the difference between what is deep learning actually? When I was in my undergrad, I've studied about neural networks and all, but I have not been working in this space for a long time. Yeah. So I just wanted to know, what is the difference between deep learning and normal learning, which we do for computer vision?
Really good question. So there's lots of different definitions that you'll get. I'm going to talk to the one that I use. So if you look at the three big phrases, which is AI, machine learning, and deep learning, We say artificial intelligence is replicating human capability. So the categories of speech, of vision, of language, of decision, etc., they're sort of human capabilities. And so we're creating AIs that replicate those capabilities. Machine learning and deep learning are techniques for how we achieve those goals. Machine learning, typically, I'm going to say straightforward with quotation marks, but typically it's like a statistical approach. So we take well, actually they're all are, but basically we have input data. So let's say we've got housing information and want to predict the price of a house. We'll have a bunch of information about the house. We'll have historical prices of the house. We label that data. We give that to a machine learning model, and it finds, the statistical patterns, and it's then able to predict housing prices based on that previous information. But that's really easy. We craft the features. We tell the machine learning model, these are the features that you need to look at. This is what I want you to predict based on this. Deep learning takes that to like a next level. And that's where you start getting these concepts of neural networks, which basically like brains, right? The parameters that are connected all over the place, dots connected all over the place. And what we're doing with deep learning is we're giving it, say, images of cats. We want to build a deep learning model to detect cats. But how do you describe what a cat is to a computer? How do you can't say that it is, because like ears are different depending on the cat. You can't say where the nose is. Like how do you actually do that? And so we leave that up to the deep learning model. And what the deep learning model does is it basically looks thousands and thousands of images to identify what are those common patterns or features. And it learns how to detect it without us explicitly telling it, these are the ears, these are the eyes, these are the nose. Like we don't tell it what to look for. It kind of picks it up itself. Now, they're really broad definitions of AI, machine learning, and deep learning. There's lots of caveats and ways to challenge each of those, but I find that those are the easiest to start with. And so everything you've seen tonight, the text analytics, the computer vision, the speech generation, they're all deep learning networks because they're very complicated. We don't have explicit ways to say, this is how you pronounce the word doctor. It learns how to pronounce that word by showing it lots and lots of examples, and it picks up on what features to use and how to produce that. So that's the really rough definition of machine learning, deep learning, and AI. For your vision use case, pretty much always deep learning, right? Like or you're training a deep learning model, you're doing what we call sort of transfer learning, or you're using the fact that Microsoft has trained a model on thousands and thousands of objects. Like this model behind the scenes knows what a soccer ball looks like, knows what a cricket bat looks like, knows what it's a computer, a chair, a screen looks like. What it doesn't know is what the Australian cricket team looks like. It can detect a person, but it can't do that extra step because it's not seen it before. So what we're doing is we're teaching it that last little bit. It's got all this enormous knowledge underneath, and we're saying use that knowledge, but just like learn this little bit extra. And that's what makes it so easy to build and so easy to deploy. So hopefully that helps with the explanation.
Yes, it does. Thanks, Matt.
Excellent. Thank you, Aditi.
So one more question.
Yeah, go.
So in the demo, which you had chosen like 15 images from Australian team, and then you showed us in the demo, you just picked one more. So, but we do need more than one image to figure out even this extra bit of learning, right?
So the more images you have, so I should say the more quality images you have to demonstrate the example, the better you are. So the minimum for that custom vision is 15. But as you can see, it obviously liked the images of the India team I gave it, but what it was actually doing is actually confusing the Australia team with cricket bats and with balls and stumps, because they're kind of the same color. They can kind of be in the same shape or the same area. So what we need to do is give it more examples to teach it how to look at the Australia team. And so 15 is the minimum to be able to train it, but the more you have, the better. Yeah.
Thanks so much.
Cool. Thank you, Aditi.
Matt, we have a question from Savanka.
Cool.
In chat. Savanka, do you want to, get on the voice and ask? Sure.
Sorry, I'm on the move, so won't be able to turn on the video network issues. Hey, Matt, thanks a lot. So, Matt, I had a two-part question. One, which was focused on vision AI for pest and disease diagnosis on crops.
Yep.
And the second one was using vision AI, but on spectral images that come in from near-infrared spectroscopy and optical imaging from satellites, and how to use that one to enhance that image, to derive diagnosis of what do we get to learn from that image. And more so, that is on the spatial. analysis of farms. So these would be the two-part question to that.
Yes. So on the, I mean, I guess the kind of related, to answer your question around can it like detect disease and things like that? Yeah, depending on, like, there's a bunch of stars next to it, but yes is the answer. Depends on the quality of the images you have of the disease. Does the disease only exist on one plant? Does it exist on, 10 different types of plants? Do you have a data set that's representative of what that disease looks like, etc.? So you could use something like custom vision, and I would actually encourage you to use that first to see how accurate it is, to see if it's any use. And often what we do is we use that as a passing point. We say, does the data we have, is it reliable enough? Is it accurate enough? We put it through custom vision. We might get 70% accuracy. And we go, okay, so clearly we can use vision for this, but we might need to go and build a custom model because there's too many specifics we need to deal with, etc. Or we might get 95% and say, great, it's actually good enough to use straight out of the box. And we do have an example. Now, this one I'm going to also put a star next to because I can't recall if they ended up using custom vision in production or not. But with Kakadu National Park, in the Northern Territory, they actually fly drones over the parklands to look for like receding shorelines, to look for moss growth, etc. And they used, I know to start off with, they did, I'm not sure what made it to production, but they used images in custom vision to detect these objects, to detect different species and things like that amongst the national park. So absolutely can be done. To use one that's kind of similar, but not plants, like we're working with a company out of the US, development teams out of India. They're using it to detect like rashes and that on the skin, to detect what type of disease someone might have. And I wouldn't necessarily recommend custom vision for that, but they use it as a starting point just to see, could they put a box around this thing? Did it work, etc. But obviously for medical diagnosis, you need an enormous amount of accuracy for that. So they decided to train their own models. So yes, you can do it. For spatial analysis, it doesn't really matter what you put into the system. If you can put a box around it or you can label it, and it's in some sort of image format, then custom image can probably take a pretty good stab at it. But the caveat's always, do I have the quality of the data? Do I have a diverse data set that represents my situation? And how unique is it? Is it something that's never been seen before in the history of data? Well, then you're probably going to need to train a custom model because it might not be good enough. Or do I need incredibly high accuracy? Yeah, then you want to train your own model rather than using this method of just training the last additional 10%. So either way, custom vision is a really good starting point, just to give you a gauge on, is it possible or not?
Great, appreciate it. Thanks, Matt.
Cool. Thank you, Samaka. Any other questions?
What do we think? I think we might wrap it up there, and I think everybody's super satisfied with what they've got, although it's always at this time that everyone gets their questions and a million come through. Matt, if you're happy with that today, I think that there will be a lot of contacts happening via your LinkedIn with questions that might not have happened today, or with ideas that people are having bubbling off the top of their heads. Thank you so much. Thanks everyone today for joining. Thanks for your questions. Thanks for your participation. It is getting such great feedback already. Best webinar to date. People are saying that they're just privileged to be here. An amazing sign of a great webinar this deep into COVID. So thank you so much. I'll hand over to you if you've got any final thoughts, but that's it from me. Over to Matt.
Cool. Thank you, Kathy. Just an absolute pleasure to be here. We turned around this presentation pretty quickly. I'm so glad with the size of the audience, and you've had some phenomenal questions. And I know this has been overwhelming for many of you, but I bet, tonight, tomorrow, the day after, you're going to be noodling on some problem. You're going to be, hang on, Matt mentioned something about this, or hey, we could use AI for this. And that's really what we want. We want this to sit in the subconscious, stew around, and then hopefully when you've got this idea or you've got this concept, you know that you can just grab AI and use it. And of course, to back up what Kathy said, please add me on LinkedIn. Please send me a message. I can be a little slow sometimes, but I will respond, and more than happy to follow up any conversations either via the email or as a conversation over a call. So yeah, please feel free to reach out, and I look forward to speaking with many of you.
Thanks so much, Matt. Thanks Matt. Everybody. Have a lovely rest of your day wherever you are in the world, and we'll see you for the next webinar. Thanks so much. See ya.
Thanks, everyone. And startups, if you could just fill out feedback, that would be great. Thank you.